What is up, everyone? We are doing history through video games again. I am jumping on with the British faction. We today are going to be going through some of the British bombers from the early to mid portion of the war. We'll have some pre-war designs coming through here and see what the British were using primarily at the beginning part of World War II. So I'm going to be flying with the Hampton, the Beaufort, the Blenheim, and the Beaufighter. So those last three, the Blenheim, the Beaufort, and the Beaufighter, I know I switched the order of them, but there's a reason. They were developed in that order. So the Blenheim was the first one that they made, and then they liked the design so much they adapted it over to the Beaufort, and then from that they went to the Beaufighter, which is one of the most famous fighters from the Second World War for the British side. Simply because this thing was a beast. It was designed to be a torpedo bomber, but they threw some cannons on that thing. It could take down fighters, and it became a fighter interceptor. It was such a popular fighter interceptor that other nations were actually using this. So other nations had multiple squadrons within their own air forces. So the Royal Air Force had nearly 60 squadrons. You start looking at the Australians, they had several squadrons. The Americans even had several squadrons as well. The British Navy had their own set of Beaufighters, 15 squadrons worth. The Canadians had 4, the New Zealanders had 2, South Africans had 2, and the Polish Freedom Fighters, the Free Polish Air Force, had a single squadron of British Beaufighters. So, gonna start off with the Beaufighter. The cannons on this thing were ridiculous. On this game, you end up getting 20 millimeter cannons. There's 4 of them. That is the only front-facing armament. There's a rear gunner as well, trying to take down anyone who's following them. But then beyond that, it's a torpedo bomber from the design. There were no bombs that it actually carried. That went to its predecessor, the Beaufort and the Blenheim. Those were the actual bombers of this body type. It was a sturdy son of a gun, though. This thing could take a hit and lay many more. So it was a beast in its own right. The development carried over through the years as the British Air Force and Fleet Arm saw that they needed kind of a versatile aircraft that was able to carry out multiple blanking on the word, multiple different kinds of operations. So they needed something that could be spotting submarines. They needed something that could be taking out ships. They needed something that could also transport. Transporting. It wasn't big enough for transport, but to be able to carry out multi-role tasks, and that's the word I was looking for, was the multi-role. So going into the Beaufort here, the Beaufort was designed in the 30s. It actually was introduced to the British Air Force in 39. From there, though, it didn't see the end of the war. It actually was retired from service in 44. So it was purely a Second World War fighter, or a bomber. So its predecessor, the Blenheim, was designed a little bit before that. Obviously, it came out first flight in 35, but it retired from the UK service in 44, just like the Beaufort. It was still being used after World War II, however. And so we'll fly a little bit of the Blenheim after this as well. It was a fairly no-nonsense bomber. The Bristol was the company that made them, and they did exceptionally well designing these, paying attention to what they liked about the Blenheim and what needed to be added to it. There were 2 gunners on it, and one of them's doing work for me right now. But the gunner positions, there's one in that ball turret on the back there, and then there was actually one up front as well. We can jump in. He was sitting up in front there, and then the Beaufort didn't actually have a specific like navigator position like you see on some of the larger bombers throughout the war, but did have a second individual up in the cockpit help out the pilot, whether it was for navigation, for bombing. So we'll see if we can stay alive long enough for one more pass. So the way that this game type works in War Thunder, if you've ever played, there are ground troops that you're supposed to be going after, and there are bases that you need to be destroying as well. People flying fighters are trying to take down bombers. Because I am on the controller, I typically do far better on a bomber than I do a fighter, just because it is easier for me to aim a bomb at a non-moving target than it is for me to aim a gun at moving targets. So, we get that captured. Okay, so now we're going to move over to the Blenheim. So similar principle to the Beaufort, we're going to go with those 500-pound bombs and get on out there. So the Blenheim, Bristol Airplane Company was the manufacturer of all 3 of these aircraft. They were a car company beforehand. They turned into a car company afterwards. They got bought up by Rolls-Royce into the 60s. So they knew what they were doing when they were making machinery, and specifically when they started designing these aircraft. And once they found a design that they liked, they modified it as needed and then put it to work. So it did numbers for the British Royal Air Force, and it was also kind of farmed out to other nations as needed. That was something I learned through this research, is that the Americans actually fought with the Beaufighter. I did not realize that was a aircraft that was flown by the U.S. Air Force, or Army Air Forces, as it was known then, in World War II. But there's actually a Beaufighter that was a British Beaufighter, but it's been repainted and made to look like an American Beaufighter, that's on display at the Air Force National Air Force Museum in Ohio. So it is kind of dressed up to look like the American Beaufighter. It was a British one, but that is on display on American soil, which was something I learned. So all of it, though, based on the Blenheim. The Blenheim actually came out as a adaptation. Yet again, this plane just lived through being adapted from one thing to another. It started off as a commercial airliner. So it was made to be the fastest commercial airliner when it was conceived. And from there, a challenge came out to essentially weaponize it, to turn it into something that the British could use throughout any future wars, if any should pop up. And I think they had a good idea that there was going to be something coming up when they saw a certain German leader acting silly. So the Blenheim was designed off of that design. They threw some bombs in it. They were able to put it into service in the late 30s. The Blenheim Mark I developed into it was a shorter body, so they developed it with a longer body later throughout its service career, so it could have a little bit more payload capacity, a little bit more carrying capacity, be a little bit more stable too. Whenever you're short like that, you're a lot more finicky in the air. You're going to be a faster response, which is why fighters are shorter than bombers. but you're a lot less stable, a lot less stable of a platform to be bombing from. So when you're wanting to be knowing where those bombs are going, you've got everything sighted up, and you actually know where your bomb sites are, to not have the plane moving around on you as you're coming up on target. And we can do that here. We'll do. That's going to be beneficial for those bombing crews. When it's unpredictable, then you're going to be wasting bombs because you're not hitting the target as much. So like I said, the Blenheim, the Beaufort, and the Beaufighter all kind of saw service, and adapted service. They were light bombers, torpedo bombers. So we actually do have some ships here, but I don't have any torpedoes with me. So we're just going to fly at them, see what we can do with our tiny little gun up top. But also going lower is going to help us get away from those fighters. Lumi's joining in the picture there. So like I said, I do have some dogs running around and playing as I'm playing, and they always are craving attention when they can't get it. So Lumi may or may not poke her head back up here again. I think she just ran off with her ball. But yep, we're going to get rid of these cargo ships. So, nice thing about bombs is they are multi-purpose. Instead of torpedoes, you kind of just have to drop your torpedo in the water. So we'll get those two out of the way. But and he's going to get that one. Perfect. So the Blenheim here, it actually did move into, ooh, looking at my notes too much. Moved in to be a night fighter. In the Second World War, you saw a lot of, and the Beaufighter was a popular option for this, you saw a lot of planes that were potentially vulnerable in the daytime because they were so large or slower moving, turned into night fighters just because they could kind of linger in the air, hang out in the area, be an air supremacy fighter in that area, prevent other planes from entering that airspace, kind of protecting airspace, or guarding like night raids for bombers, be a long-range fighter interceptor on those missions. We'll see if we can get one more bomb off. Yeah. Oh. Barely. Okay. So, the, perfect. The Blenheim was just a very, I don't want to call it primitive idea on the design, but I mean, it was the first version of this plane to see combat. So it didn't have all the bells and whistles that later the Beaufort would and the Beaufighter would. But, oh, we didn't get that last one off. Oh, we're actually gonna not have enough on that one. That'll be interesting to see, because I was only able to get 5 minutes of that. And I was alive for 6 minutes. So last, and kind of least, not really least, but it's a different plane entirely. It's gonna be the Hampton. So the Hampton was a twin. All right, I didn't even get to it. But just going to touch briefly on the Hampton since I had it on the lineup. It was a twin-engine medium bomber. It was designed in 38, retired in 43. It saw a fair amount of service. It took place in the first 1,000 bomber raid on Cologne. So 1,000 bombers on formation, going over the English Channel and going into Germany, trying to get some bombs dropped on target. So that's what they did there with those planes. But getting the recording here, so that's one mission with some British bombers, kind of following the progression for Blenheim, Beaufort, and Beaufighter. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, but there's some solid planes. There's some great history within them. I'm going to continue to revisit them as I can. I'm going to try to focus on just different eras. So looking at kind of beginning of the war with different different nations, or what planes they had at their disposal right when the war started, because every nation kind of had a different mentality going into the Second World War. Some of them were not planning on having as long or dragged out of a war as what happened. So we'll keep going on that, and then drop a like, drop a comment, let me know what you think of this video, if you want to see more stuff like this, or suggest other things that I can do. We'll get a few more churned out today and see what we can get figured out. So we'll check you guys later.